How do you make a drawing in space? How do you make a sculpture that's essentially made of nothing? If you're not paying attention, you might completely miss the work of Fred Sandback. So, I thought we should talk about it. Art lovers, welcome back to the channel. My name is Christopher West, and this is the place where we talk all things modern and contemporary art and design. And today I want to talk about an artist who uses humble yarn to make monumental sculptures. In a film on the art of Fred Sandback, Tierhoff and Earnhardt summed it up perfectly. He used a minimum of resources to produce maximum effect. But how did we get here? How did we get to a place where yarn in a museum is considered art? Well, first we need to know a little bit about the artist. As a young man, Fred Sandback made banjos and dulcimers. In order to make stringed instruments that function correctly, they need to be made with skill and precision. And he took his love for these instruments with him to Yale, where he studied philosophy. Ultimately, he went to grad school to study sculpture. Now, Yale's MFA program for decades has consistently ranked among the top. And it was here he got to study with and work under visiting instructors Donald Judd and Robert Morris, two sculptors that were pioneers in the minimalist art movement. Sandback would take his background in philosophy, his love for stringed instruments, and newfound fascination with minimalism to create a new type of artwork. And he didn't just want to take an object and place it in a room or on a pedestal. He wanted the viewer's mind to perceive the form. So in 1967, he used string and wire to outline a 2x4 lying on the ground. He said, "The first sculpture I made with a piece of string and a little wire was the outline of a rectangular solid. It was a casual act, but it seemed to open up a lot of possibilities for me." He would soon abandon wire as a material in his sculptures as he preferred acrylic yarn, a material that was less rigid, less crisp, and more soft, more fuzzy. And you notice these differences not only in the yarn itself, but in the shadows. For Sandback, these weren't just objects to be viewed. They became a part of what he called pedestrian space, the spaces that are occupied by the viewer. They coexist with the architecture, and over time, from different perspectives and as the lighting conditions change, they slowly reveal themselves. He said he hoped to assert a certain place or volume in its full materiality without occupying and obscuring it. He wanted to make sculpture that didn't have an inside, so when you look at it, you not only see the line, but all of the negative space around it. And that negative space is as important as the work itself. Early on in his career, his work was embraced. While still in grad school, Sandback would exhibit in Germany, who embraced minimalism from its earliest days. America and elsewhere were slower to adapt, but soon they did too. He participated in exhibitions at the Whitney Museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, and in the Biennial of Sydney. He was one of the first artists to have his work sponsored by the Dia Art Foundation. And they even maintained a museum dedicated to his work in Massachusetts from 1981 to 1996. I had no idea there was a museum dedicated to Fred Sandback's work, and sadly it closed before I even realized I liked art. I first encountered his work when my local museum reopened after an extensive renovation and expansion, probably around 20 years ago. And I found these images from that installation on the museum's website. This installation happened after the artist's death, and I remember the museum working with the Sandback family to make sure the work was installed as Fred intended. You see, Sandback would create these sculptures specifically to respond to the environment in which they were placed. Although you might see similar configurations, there were slight differences depending on the architecture. So Sandback would draw sketches. And he thought of these sketches much like a musical composer might think of sheet music. Yes, the instructions were clearly laid out, but depending on the orchestra or the musician, each performance could be slightly different. And he was okay with that. Sadly, this story doesn't have a happy ending. Sandback would die by suicide in his studio in New York in 2003. He was preparing for a major exhibition of his work in Munich. The life of an artist is not always an easy one. So clearly museums and institutions have embraced his work. But what about the collectors? Do collectors want a line of yarn or a simple drawing of lines in their home? Well, the answer, as you might have guessed, is yes. And although we're not talking about multi-million-dollar pieces like we often do on this channel, his installations do often trade well into six figures. And what you are often buying is not the yarn, but rather a set of instructions and a certificate of authenticity from the estate. It's much like a Soloist wall drawing. If you have one of these in your home and decide to move, you don't have to remove the wall and take the wall with you. You paint over the original piece and have it repainted in its new location. And these rehangs for both Sandback and Lewitt are often done in concert with the estate to make sure the artist's work is installed as he originally intended. But if you want something more traditional that might be a little easier to wrap your head around, he also made many drawings, and these can sometimes be picked up for a few $1,000s. To have one of these in your home means that you may get strange looks from your house guests, and you'll likely get some comments like, "My kid could do that." But no, your kid could not do that. Your kid could not take all of art history and reduce it down to a simple gesture. I find these drawings elegant and peaceful. And at a time when we are constantly surrounded by all the noise, the cell phones, the social media, Fred Sandback gives us a break from all of that. And if you like Sandback's work, I think you'll also really like the work of Eva Hesse. I did a video on her, and I'll put a link to that right here. As always, if you're still watching, you're an absolute rock star. Thank you again for all the support, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Ciao!